Dust hung low in the early light, clinging to every wooden beam, every dry leaf, every breath Eliza took as she stepped onto the warped porch. Her hands were still red from digging in the frost-bitten earth, trying to unearth the last stubborn potatoes while her daughters slept side by side in the same coat. She hadn't noticed the rider approach, but she heard the nails, 3 of them, slammed into her door with the precision of a man who did it daily and without remorse. Sheriff Callum. Gray beard, gray hat, gray eyes. The kind of man whose silence felt heavier than a threat. "You're late," she said hoarsely, shielding her eyes. The wind stole her shawl's edge and flapped it like a rag. He didn't answer, just pointed at the paper now nailed to her door. Her stomach folded inward. She stepped closer. Her eyes caught on the bolded line. Property seized. Debt to be settled by possessions or persons. Her voice cracked. "This land's mine. My husband paid for." "He lost the deed in cards," Callum said. "To Bishop." The name struck like a slap. Bishop. The saloon keeper. The man who never looked a woman in the eyes just below the chin. "You can't take my girls. Law says collateral's fair game. I'm just the hand, not the hammer." Eliza stepped in front of the door like she could shield them with her shadow. "Then I suggest you get off my land before I fetch my husband's rifle. You do that and they won't be sold. They'll be buried." He tipped his hat like he'd done her a kindness, then turned his horse. She watched the dust bloom around his boots as he rode off toward town, slow as sin. She didn't cry. Not then. Ruth, her eldest, watched from the loft. 11 years old with a gaze like flint. May, 7, clutched a faded rag doll with no name, her face still soft with sleep. "What's collateral mean?" May asked. Eliza didn't answer. Instead, she busied herself with bread she couldn't afford to bake, water she barely had to boil. Her fingers trembled as she shaped dough that would never rise. She wiped them on her skirt and looked out over the fields. Frost glittered over dead vines. Their last cow had been sold 3 weeks ago. The well was half mud. The last letter from her husband's family had read, "You're on your own now." And so she was. The next day the town bell rang twice before noon. That meant a public gathering. That meant the Bishop boys were moving fast. By the time Eliza and her girls reached the square, half the town was already gathered. Some with hats over hearts. Others with coin in their fists. The platform wasn't high. Just enough to make you feel small. "Name?" the clerk asked. "Eliza Marin." "And the girls?" She hesitated. "Ruth, May." The man scribbled. "Ages?" 11. 7. "Healthy." Her jaw clenched. "They're children." He looked up. So were the last ones. That didn't stop the gavel. A low murmur spread as Eliza stepped up. Some pitied her. Others just wanted the spectacle. Bishop leaned against the post, smoking a cigar that glowed like an ember of hell. His grin was wide. "We'll start the bidding low. I'm generous." The gavel rose. And Eliza couldn't breathe. May held Ruth's hand, unsure, barefoot, their dresses mended one too many times. The clerk called out numbers. Eliza heard them through cotton. $10. 12. 15. Ruth flinched when Bishop raised his hand. 25 for the older, he called. Ruth's fingers squeezed tighter. May looked confused. The gavel hovered. And in that moment, Eliza almost screamed. But her voice failed her again. Then someone spoke behind them. "I'll take them both." The voice didn't shout. It cut clean through the noise like a knife through an apple. The kind of voice that didn't need to explain itself. It carried weight. A man stepped from the edge of the crowd. Dusty hat. Sun-leathered skin. Broad shoulders. Calm eyes. He looked like someone who'd lived more in silence than speech. Samuel Hayes. Some folks knew him. Most didn't. He owned a ranch on the outskirts, far from the town's thirst for power and coin. Rumors said he'd once had a family. Others said he'd buried them. "I said I'll take both girls," he repeated. Bishop chuckled. "And what exactly will you do with cowboy? Teach him how to herd cattle or wash your shirts?" Samuel's eyes narrowed. "I'll set them free." Laughter rippled through the crowd. But not from Eliza. The sheriff frowned. "Ain't how this works, Sam." Samuel reached into his coat. Pulled out a pouch. Dropped it at the clerk's feet. The sound of silver clinking inside silenced everyone. "That enough?" The clerk looked at Bishop. Bishop scowled, but the sheriff nodded. "It'll do." The gavel dropped. The ride back to Samuel's ranch was silent but strange. May sat beside Samuel on the wagon bench, staring at him like he was a riddle. Ruth stayed behind, arms crossed, eyes watching everything. Eliza rode on a mule behind the wagon. Her pride burned. Her shame stung worse. "You didn't have to do that," she muttered as they reached the edge of his land. "No, I didn't." "Then why?" Samuel didn't answer for a long time. The wagon creaked. The prairie rolled by in golden tufts. "Because I've seen what happens to girls left in that man's hands." "And what about us now?" "You'll stay. A while. Get warm. Get strong." "I don't take charity." "I didn't offer it." Eliza stiffened. "Then what's this?" "A choice. You're free to go. But you ain't got to." He pulled the wagon to a stop by a modest house, weather-beaten, quiet, and clean. A barn beside it. Fenced pasture. Well, a porch swing that still moved slightly in the breeze as if someone had just risen from it. That night, after the girls were tucked into the hayloft of the barn and the lanterns were dimmed, Eliza stood outside under the cold moon. She stared out at the horizon, arms wrapped around herself. Samuel came out with 2 mugs. Offered her one. "Coffee?" she asked. "Not much left. Hot water and a pinch of grounds." She took it anyway. They stood in silence. "I failed them," she said. "No, you didn't. I let it happen. You didn't walk away." She looked up at him. The moonlight caught the old scar near his collarbone, barely visible. "You lose someone?" she asked. He nodded. "Wife. And a daughter." Eliza swallowed. "Then why help us? Doesn't it hurt?" Samuel looked toward the barn. "Some hurts ain't meant to fade, but sometimes they can be repurposed." Later, as Eliza lay on a makeshift bed inside the old pantry, she heard Ruth whisper to May, "Do you think he'll keep us safe?" May replied softly, "He didn't blink once." And outside, the wind stirred the dust again. But this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something starting. Something uncertain. Fragile. But real. And the hammer, at least for now, had fallen in their favor. Samuel's ranch wasn't much by town standards. One sagging barn. A split-rail fence that leaned toward the horizon. A house built by hands that had known both labor and grief. But to Eliza, it felt unnervingly still, like time had curled up and gone quiet here. The girls were fed, bread and beans, and slept in the loft above the main room, curled like pups in borrowed quilts. Eliza stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the wind stir the dying stalks in Samuel's field. "You think it's done?" she asked. Samuel didn't look up from the ledger on his table. "I think they're humiliated." She turned to him. "That's not the same as safe." "No," he said. "It's not." Eliza walked the length of the room slowly, studying the shelves lined with worn books, a rusted rifle hanging over the hearth, a wedding ring nailed into a beam. Her voice softened. "That hers?" He nodded once. "You never took it down?" "Didn't see the point." She leaned against the wall. "Most men would have." He set his pen down. "Most men would have let you burn on that platform too." She didn't reply. Didn't need to. The next morning came hard and cold, breath visible in the early sun. Ruth was already outside, hauling a pail of water with slow, stubborn strength. May sat cross-legged on the porch, rubbing her eyes. "Where's the barn cat?" she asked. "We don't have one," Samuel said from the steps. May frowned. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Too many hawks." May's mouth twisted. "I could be one. A barn cat. If I had whiskers." Samuel smiled without showing teeth. Eliza noticed that. The kind of smile that had been forgotten for years and didn't know how to come back properly. By midday the heat returned, unseasonable and sharp. Samuel brought out a wagon and hitched it. "Where are you going?" Eliza asked. "Town." Her shoulders tensed. "Alone?" He paused. "I'm not taking the girls with me if that's what you mean." She stepped closer. "You shouldn't go at all. They'll come for you." He looked down at her. "That's the plan. You think they won't shoot you in the street?" He swung up onto the seat. "They might." "You're not God, Mr. Hayes." "No," he said. "But someone's got to speak like they remember what he sounds like." She watched him ride away, dust curling behind the wheels like smoke. The town hadn't changed in a day. Still smelled like horse and whiskey. Still whispered like it had secrets to sell. Samuel walked straight into the sheriff's office and placed 2 papers on the desk. Callum looked up slowly. "You got a habit of causing dust storms." Samuel folded his arms. "These are copies of Bishop's forged deeds. From the notary's own desk. And this," he tapped the second page, "is the original deed to Eliza's land. Not her husband's. Hers." Callum didn't move. "And how'd you get those?" I asked. "Who signed off on it?" Samuel smiled. A woman with 4 sons and no patience for gamblers. Callum leaned back. That's still not the law. Samuel leaned forward. No. But it's the truth. The sheriff looked at the papers for a long time. Then he said, "You know what happens when you strip power from a man who ain't got anything else?" Samuel nodded. "He gets dangerous." Callum sighed. "You planning to keep the girls?" "No. I'm planning to let them stay." "There's a difference." Back at the ranch, Eliza found Ruth sitting on the fence rail, legs swinging, eyes fixed toward the southern ridge. "He's not coming back, is he?" Ruth said quietly. Eliza walked to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "He said he would." "They all say things," Ruth muttered. "Papa said he'd stop gambling." "That's not the same." "He sold our horse for whiskey." Eliza didn't respond. The truth in Ruth's voice was sharp, edged like flint. She knew better than to dull it with comfort. "He wasn't always like that," she said instead. "But he was in the end." A silence stretched between them, long as the prairie. Eliza could feel her daughter pulling away inside herself, layer by layer, year by year. And she didn't know how to reach through it. "You think Mr. Hayes is different?" Ruth asked. Eliza swallowed. "I don't know what he is yet." Samuel returned that night just before sunset. His face was calm. No blood. No bruises. He brought flour, coffee, and a folded piece of paper. "This is yours now," he said, handing it to Eliza. She unfolded it slowly. The land deed. Her name on it. Not her husband's. Not Bishop's. She looked up at him. "I don't have a way to pay you," she whispered. "I'm not selling." She stared at him for a long moment, then asked the thing she feared most, "What do you want?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Nothing I can take from you. Just something I hope you'll give." She waited. "Peace," he said softly. "For all of you. If you decide to stay." Later, while the girls played with seed sacks and giggled in the barn, Eliza cleaned dishes by lantern light. Samuel sat outside, whittling something into the dark. "I don't know how to accept kindness anymore," she said through the window. "You don't have to," he replied. "It ain't a contract. But I feel like I'm still owned." "You were never owned. You were just surrounded by men who told you otherwise." She turned toward the light and leaned on the sill. "Why are you alone?" He kept whittling. "I was too late." "Too late for what?" "For them." Her breath caught. "They were taken?" she asked. He nodded. "Sickness came hard. I rode for help. Storm came faster." Eliza felt the chill of it, loss that came when you were doing your best and it still wasn't enough. "That why you helped us?" He paused. "Part of it. And the rest. I don't like men who buy people." That night, as the fire crackled and wind pressed gentle fingers against the window panes, Ruth crept downstairs. She stood over Samuel, who had dozed in the chair with a book in his lap. "Mr. Hayes?" He blinked awake. "Yes, Ruth?" She held something in her hand. The doll. Its one eye stitched in crooked thread. "She said it's good luck," Ruth said, placing it in his lap. "But I think it's more about memory." He looked at the doll. Then at her. "I'll keep it close." She nodded once and turned to go. "Ruth?" She stopped. "Your mother's stronger than you know." Ruth didn't turn back. But she smiled. In the days that followed, things settled into a rhythm. Eliza helped repair a broken gate. Ruth read books aloud to May. Samuel showed them where the best berries grew, deep behind the hills where hawks flew low and silent. But peace, Eliza knew, never lasted long out here. Especially when men felt humiliated. Especially when Bishop still held grudges. One afternoon, while Samuel was out checking fence lines, a rider came fast across the plain. Dust in his wake. A red bandana across his mouth. Eliza stepped out with the rifle in hand, Ruth behind her with a bucket still swinging. The rider didn't slow until the last second. "Message from Bishop," the man growled. "He says you've got 1 week to return what's his, or next time it won't be paper." "What's his?" Eliza hissed. "The girls, the land, the dignity." She leveled the rifle. "You tell Bishop he never had any of those." The rider grinned. "We'll see who's still talking by week's end." He turned and rode off into the dust, leaving the silence behind him sharp and splintered. That evening, Samuel returned to find Eliza standing by the porch, rifle at her side, eyes hard. "They sent a warning." He nodded. "I expected it. What do we do?" He looked toward the hills, where the sky burned orange and the birds flew low. "We hold the line." "You think we're ready for that?" "No," he said. "But sometimes readiness comes after the fire, not before." The sun dipped. Shadows stretched. And inside the house, Ruth and May braided each other's hair, humming the song their mother used to sing before the world taught her to stop. Out here, memory didn't ask for permission. It simply returned, through smells, through firelight, through the stillness of men who spoke less and meant more. And somewhere deep in Eliza's ribs, just beneath the fear, something else had started to grow. Not hope. Not yet. But something near it. Something shaped like resolve. The sky cracked open that night. Thunder rolled like a drumbeat from God's warpath, and the wind howled over Samuel's ranch as though the land itself knew something was coming. Eliza bolted upright in the dark, her pulse thudding against her throat like a warning. Beside her, Ruth stirred. In the loft above, May muttered in her sleep. The smell reached them first, acrid and sharp like burning rope and pitch. "Samuel," Eliza whispered, scrambling from the cot. He was already outside, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the orange glow rising from the barn. The fire had teeth. Flames licked through the roof like a monster's tongue, devouring beams and shadows alike. The animals were already gone, let out before the blaze took hold. But Samuel's expression didn't ease. Eliza reached him, hair whipping in the wind. "It was them," she said. He nodded once. "Bishop's boys." They watched the barn fall in on itself, cinders launching into the night sky like dying stars. Eliza stood with her jaw clenched and hands shaking, while Ruth stood behind them both, silent and unmoving. "They'll burn more than your barn," Eliza said. "Next time it'll be the house. Or us." Samuel turned to her. His face was calm, but the firelight painted a storm in his eyes. "They want to make us run," he said. "They're succeeding." "No," he said. "They're provoking us. There's a difference." By morning, all that remained was a black skeleton, smoke still curling from the beams like breath from a grave. May wept when she saw the melted remains of her rag doll in the ash. Ruth didn't speak at all. Samuel worked through the wreckage with quiet hands. Eliza helped him drag what could be salvaged into a pile: burnt nails, half-charred tools, a horseshoe fused with heat. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was concentrated. "Where do we go from here?" Eliza asked. Samuel didn't stop working. "Forward. That's not a direction. That's a wish." He straightened. "It's a decision." She studied him. "You always this calm when people try to burn you alive?" He glanced at her. "Only when I expected it." Later that day, while the girls fetched water and tried to act like the world wasn't tipping beneath them, Eliza and Samuel sat at the table, ink and paper between them. "I want to write to the judge," Eliza said. "Send proof of the forged deeds. Ask for a hearing." Samuel shook his head. "He's Bishop's cousin. That letter won't leave the county." Eliza's lips twisted. "Then what?" "We wait." "For what?" Samuel's gaze was level. "For them to step too far." That night, Ruth refused supper. She sat on the porch rail, watching the dark settle in over the hills. Eliza found her there, arms folded, eyes hard as obsidian. "You think he can protect us?" Ruth didn't look away. "He's just a man. And they're a mob." Eliza sat beside her. "He's not trying to be a hero." "Then why's he risking everything?" Eliza didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "Maybe he's not risking everything. Maybe we are." Ruth blinked. "You ever think we're not just being saved, Ruth?" Eliza asked. "That maybe we're the ones saving something too?" The next morning, a note appeared on the fence post, tied with red string. No signature. "Last warning. Leave by Sunday. Or we'll bury the choice." Samuel read it aloud, then burned it without a word. Eliza felt a knot in her throat. "They won't stop, Samuel." "I know. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." "You're not. You already lost your barn. I've lost worse." The way he said it, quiet, not bitter, made her chest ache. "I'll understand if you ask us to go," she said. "I won't. Even if it means they hurt you?" He looked at her like the question itself wounded him. "I won't," he repeated. Ruth began waking with nightmares. She wouldn't describe them, but Eliza knew what they were: flames, chains, crowds of men who smiled with no warmth. May, too young to understand the depth of danger, began shadowing Samuel, asking endless questions. He answered each one with a patience Eliza hadn't seen in years, as if kindness were something he practiced like scripture. "What's a sheriff do?" "Depends on the town." "Did you have a daughter?" "I did." "Did she braid her hair like me?" "She did." "Was she funny?" "She was everything." May didn't ask again after that. Just leaned her head on his shoulder and stayed quiet a while. 3 days later, the Bishop brothers returned. They didn't knock. They came at dawn with 3 riders, guns holstered but visible, and smirks slick with certainty. Samuel met them outside, coat unbuttoned, rifle across his lap. "Back for what's not yours?" he asked. The eldest, Dirk Bishop, chewed a stalk of grass. "Thought we'd be neighborly. Make sure no one's squatting where they shouldn't be." "This is her land," Samuel said. Dirk glanced at Eliza, who'd stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Women can't own land here. Not without a husband." "She doesn't need one," Samuel said. Dirk smiled slowly. "Then she'll need a coffin." Samuel stood. "Say that again." "I said." The gun was drawn before Dirk could finish. Samuel didn't fire. He didn't need to. Just the motion, the silence, the steady hand was enough. "Next time," Samuel said, "you'll bury your own brother if you try something stupid." Dirk sneered. "You'll regret this, Hayes." Samuel lowered the barrel. "Only thing I regret is not firing already." They rode off, slower than they came but not defeated. "Not yet." Eliza turned to Samuel after they were gone. "That bluff won't work twice." "I know. So, we prepare." That night, as the stars scattered like frost across the sky, Eliza brought a quilt out to where Samuel sat beneath the porch lantern. "You don't sleep much," she said. "I sleep when it's safe." She sat beside him, the quiet, thick, and kind. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "For what?" "For standing with us. Even now. Even after the fire. I don't see another way I'd want to live. You didn't even know us a month ago." "I didn't need to." "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I saw what it did to you. That day. On that platform. I saw the look in your eyes, and it was the same one I wore when they buried my family." She turned to him. "And what was that look?" "Grief trying to pretend it was rage. Because rage feels stronger. But it isn't. It just burns longer." She blinked tears away. "And what's stronger than both?" He met her gaze. "The will to stay." Inside, Ruth lay beside May, the firelight flickering across their faces. "Do you think we'll have to leave again?" May whispered. "No," Ruth said, stroking her sister's hair. "I think this time we stay. Even if it's hard." May yawned. "Do you trust him?" Ruth hesitated. "I think I trust how Mama looks at him," she finally said. In the yard, the ash from the barn had settled like snow. Soft, silent, but not gone. Just waiting for the next storm. And this time they'd be ready for it. It happened just before dawn, when the world was still brittle with frost and silence. Eliza had barely slipped on her boots when Samuel burst through the door, eyes dark with warning. "They're coming." She didn't need to ask who. He'd seen the dust cloud on the ridge. 5 riders. Armed. Heading straight for them. Eliza turned, grabbed the girls from their sleeping spots in the loft. Ruth was already reaching for her boots. May, half asleep, clung to her doll's remains and asked, "Is it the bad men?" "Yes," Eliza said, strapping on her satchel, "but we're not going to let them win." By the time the wagon was loaded, the sky had begun to pale, streaks of gray brushing the distant peaks. Samuel hitched the mule team fast, his movements clean and efficient. No wasted breath. "They know this land better than we do," he muttered, checking the rifle tucked beneath the seat. "We can't outrun them. But we can outsmart them." Eliza climbed into the wagon, girls beside her. "Where are we headed?" "To the crossing." "The canyon trail?" He nodded. "They can't follow us narrow there. But it'll be close." She didn't argue. She trusted him now, in that unspoken way that came when someone had stood between you and fire, and hadn't flinched. The ride was rough. Ruts deep. Ice still clinging to the grass. The wagon wheels bounced over frozen mud and dried roots. Samuel rode ahead on horseback, scanning the horizon, hand never straying far from his rifle. Behind them the sound came, hoofbeats distant but gaining. Eliza glanced back, heart seizing. The riders were there. 5 shadows galloping through dust, one holding something long and gleaming. "They've seen us," she said. Samuel didn't look back. "Let them. That's part of it." He veered left, guiding them through a rocky incline where the trail narrowed and climbed. "This way. Stay close to the wall." Branches scraped the sides of the wagon. The mule wheezed from the climb. May clung to her mother's arm. Ruth held a small knife Samuel had given her, though she barely knew how to grip it. The first gunshot cracked through the canyon like thunder. Eliza ducked low over the girls, heart pounding in her ears. Samuel turned his horse sharp, returned fire. One of the riders reeled back, horse bucking sideways. For left, he called out. They reached a narrow bend where the canyon wall curved hard. The river roared below, a steep drop but shallow enough to cross on foot if they had to. Samuel dismounted. We'll make our stand here. Eliza jumped down, grabbing the rifle from the wagon. They'll pin us, she said. We've got no cover. They'll think that. Until they're in range. He handed her a wrapped bundle from the saddlebag, dynamite sticks. Eliza stared. Where the hell? Mining days. Kept them dry. She took one. You plan on throwing this? I plan on ending this. The first of the Bishop boys came too fast, riding high with a pistol raised and a mouth full of victory. Samuel fired once. The man jerked back like pulled by a string and fell from the saddle. 3 left. Gunfire cracked again. A bullet splintered a rock inches from Eliza's shoulder. Ruth screamed but didn't run. She dropped behind the wagon, pulling May down with her. Stay low. Eliza shouted. One of the riders dismounted and began flanking. Samuel saw it too late. Eliza moved. Fast. No hesitation. She slid along the edge of the canyon, aimed and pulled the trigger. The man dropped. 2 left. But one had already reached the top of the ridge. Dirk Bishop himself, teeth clenched around a cigar, rifle aimed straight at Samuel's chest. You always were the quiet type, Hayes, he growled, spitting the cigar out. Guess I'll quiet you for good. Samuel turned, but not fast enough. The shot rang out. But it wasn't Dirk's rifle that fired. It was Ruth. The shot was wild, but close enough to make Dirk duck and curse. It gave Samuel the second he needed. He rolled, fired once, and Dirk's leg gave out beneath him. The outlaw screamed, tumbled backward, and over the edge. They heard the splash below. The last rider turned and fled. Silence fell. Not the kind of silence that comes from absence, but the kind that comes from survival. From blood cooling in the dust. From breath held too long and finally exhaled. Eliza dropped the rifle. Her hands were shaking. Samuel sat back against a boulder, clutching his shoulder. A grazing wound, but deep enough to bleed. You're hurt, she said. He smiled faintly. Just enough to remember I'm still alive. Ruth stepped out from behind the wagon, the small pistol in her hand still trembling. Eliza rushed to her. Where did you? He gave it to me, Ruth said, voice hollow. In case you couldn't stop them. Eliza pulled her into a hug so tight Ruth whimpered. But she didn't let go. Samuel stood slowly, eyes scanning the trail. That's the end of them. For now, Eliza said. No, I mean it. The Bishop line's broken. His brothers were cowards. They won't come back. Not after this. He looked down at the canyon. Blood at the crossing, he murmured. Just like my wife. Eliza looked up at him. What do you mean? He didn't speak for a long time. Then, the same river. Years ago. We tried to make it through a flash flood. Lost the wagon. Lost her. Lost the girl. Eliza's throat closed. And you came back here anyway? I didn't. Not until I saw you on that platform. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. You think it's over? She asked. No, he said. But I think it's changing. They buried the dead near the river, marked the graves with stones. No names. Just silence. On the way back, the girls sat in the wagon, heads resting on one another. The wind was colder now and the sky heavy with dusk. Eliza sat beside Samuel. His sleeve was blood-soaked, but his face was clear. You saved us, she said. He shook his head. You saved yourselves. I just bought you time. You risked your life. So did you. She looked at him. Are we free now? He didn't answer. But the land looked different. Quieter. The kind of quiet earned, not given. When they reached the ranch, the scorched barn stood like a scar, but they didn't look at it the same way anymore. Eliza stepped down, helped Ruth and May out, then turned to Samuel. Come inside, she said softly. He hesitated, then followed. The fire was already lit. The girls curled up near it. Eliza brought out coffee. No sugar. No milk. Just warmth. They drank in silence. When the fire cracked, Eliza turned. You know, she said, a man once told me grief tries to dress itself in rage, but that it isn't stronger. Samuel met her eyes. And what is? She smiled. The will to stay. The morning after the canyon crossing, the world looked rebuilt. Not repaired, there was still ash in the fields and blood in the riverbed, but the fear that once curled around Eliza's ribs like wire had finally loosened. She stood by the fence post, watching the girls race across the frost-laced grass, their laughter rising like birds into the cold blue. Ruth chased May in a slow circle, hair flying, cheeks pink with life. There was something new in Ruth's stride, confidence, not hardened but tempered. Eliza had seen her daughter look over her shoulder every day for a year. Now she didn't. Samuel stood a few yards off, arms folded, left shoulder still stiff from the wound, his expression unreadable. "They're lighter today," she said. He nodded without taking his eyes off the girls. "They earned it." She glanced toward the barn's charred skeleton. "We all did." Word spread faster than wildfire in a town starved for gossip. By midweek, every saloon, stable, and church pew echoed with the same whispered tale. Bishop was gone, the outlaw line broken by a widowed woman and a rancher with no taste for crowds. Some said the sheriff finally grew a spine. Others said God had. Sheriff Callum rode out to the ranch that Friday with a paper in hand and sweat on his brow. He dismounted without speaking, handed the folded document to Eliza, and removed his hat. She unfolded it. A formal decree. Her name. Her land. Full rights restored. "I thought the law wasn't on my side," she said. Callum glanced at Samuel. "Turns out, sometimes it just needs a shove." He rode off without asking for coffee or pleasantries. Eliza watched him go. "That's not a man used to losing." "No," Samuel said. "But maybe he's tired of backing the wrong side." The next week, the preacher came. He brought building supplies and 2 young men to help rebuild the barn. He didn't say much, just rolled up his sleeves and hammered planks with a kind of penance. May made them lemonade with wild mint and too much water, and Ruth tried to learn how to use a handsaw without taking off a finger. Samuel let her. They worked together in a rhythm that felt like healing. Dust and sweat. Timber and laughter. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in copper streaks. It was Ruth who said it first. "You should stay, Mr. Hayes." He looked at her, startled. "I live here." She shook her head. "Not just live. Stay. With us." May added, "You're already part of the family." Eliza didn't speak right away. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twined. "We don't have much," she said, voice quiet. "You have more than most," he replied. "You still keep your wife's ring on that beam." Samuel turned his eyes to the doorframe, where the gold band hung like a quiet memory. "I do." "Does that mean there's no room for anyone else?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, with great care, he rose, walked to the beam, and took the ring down. He held it in his palm a moment. Then he placed it in a wooden box, shut the lid, and set it on the mantel. "I'll never forget her," he said. "But maybe remembering doesn't have to mean stopping." Eliza stood. "I don't want someone to fix my life. I don't want to be someone's redemption. I don't want to be needed," she said. "I just want to be chosen." Samuel stepped close. "Then let me choose you." The air shifted. Not dramatic. Not thunderous. Just something small and undeniable, like the way fire starts from a single ember. Eliza reached out, took his hand, and didn't let go. On the first day of spring, the town held a gathering. A new barn now stood behind Samuel's house, sturdy and wide. The townsfolk brought food, music, and hesitant goodwill. The preacher blessed the harvest. The blacksmith's daughter brought wildflowers. No one spoke of the fire. Or the blood. But they all looked at Eliza differently now. As someone who had stood on an auction block, and climbed back down on her own terms. Ruth wore a blue ribbon in her hair. May clutched a carved wooden bird Samuel had made her. They didn't flinch when people looked their way. They smiled. Eliza stood near the door, dress pressed, face clean, back straight. A young woman approached her with trembling lips and eyes too familiar. "They're still threatening women," the girl said. "In the back rooms. With paper and promises." Eliza met her gaze. "Then we don't run anymore." The girl blinked. "We. All of us," Eliza said. "Every last one." That night, after the guests had gone and the lanterns were doused, Samuel and Eliza stood on the porch, the prairie stretching wide before them. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stepped forward that day?" she asked. "All the time." "What do you see?" He shook his head. "Nothing I'd want to live with." She leaned against him, resting her head on his uninjured shoulder. "You didn't just set them free," she said. "No. You set me free too." And as the wind moved across the tall grass like a lullaby, Eliza closed her eyes and let herself believe something she hadn't dared in years. That a woman could be broken and still be worth choosing. That daughters could be stolen from a platform and still end up laughing in the sun. That sometimes the quietest men carry the fiercest kind of love. And that maybe, just maybe, when the world writes you off, it's not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the part where you stop surviving and start living.